Hey everyone, welcome back to our journey through Japan's most terrifying urban legends. Tonight, we're starting in Sapporo, Hokkaido, where late-night subway workers have a rule they never discuss with passengers. If you hear a sound like Teke Teke echoing through the tunnels after midnight, you run and you don't look back. I learned about this from a maintenance worker who quit his job after what he saw in the depths of Odori Station in winter 2021. And trust me, once you hear his story, you'll understand why some subway lines mysteriously close for maintenance on certain nights. But before I tell you what crawls through those tunnels using its hands, let me explain why Japanese rail workers still leave offerings at certain platforms, and why the sound of metal scraping on concrete makes veteran conductors go pale. Teke Teke, as every Japanese school child whispers during sleepovers, is the vengeful spirit of a young woman who was cut in half by a train. Some say she was pushed, others say she jumped, but all agree she fell on the tracks during winter, and the cold numbed her body so much that she didn't realize she'd been severed until she tried to stand. Now she drags herself at impossible speeds using her arms, the sound of her movement, teke teke, echoing as her elbows and what remains of her torso scrapes against the ground, hunting for victims to share her fate. The maintenance worker, let's call him Tanaka-san, had been inspecting tracks in Sapporo's subway system for 15 years without incident. That December night, he was working the late shift, checking the rails between Odori and Susukino stations after the last train at 12:47 a.m. The tunnels were freezing, his breath visible in the fluorescent emergency lighting. He only sounds the distant hum of ventilation and his own footsteps on gravel. The first oddity happened near the midpoint between stations. His radio crackled with static. Then he heard what sounded like someone counting. Ichi, ni, san. But the voice was wrong. Wet, gurgling, like someone talking through liquid. Control didn't respond when he called in, just more static. Then he noticed scratches on the tunnel wall, fresh ones at about waist height, running parallel to the tracks for meters. The second sign came minutes later. He heard it echoing from behind him, a rhythmic scraping sound. Tek, 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 like someone dragging something heavy across concrete. He turned, shining his flashlight down the tunnel, but saw nothing. The sound stopped. But when he turned back to continue his inspection, there were handprints on the rail he'd just checked. Small, feminine handprints in what looked like oil or grease, but they were warm to the touch in the freezing tunnel. The escalation began when he reached an emergency alcove. His flashlight beam caught something that shouldn't exist. A trail of dark liquid leading from the tracks up the wall and across the ceiling, defying gravity. The trail was fresh, still dripping, and it smelled like iron in winter earth. That's when the temperature dropped even further, so cold his flashlight began to flicker, the batteries failing despite being new. He heard it again, closer now. Teke, teke, teke. But this time, it was coming from above. He looked up, and his flashlight beam illuminated something that made him forget how to breathe. A young woman in what had once been a high school uniform, but she ended at the waist, her lower body simply gone. She was crawling across the ceiling using her arms, her long black hair hanging down like a curtain, her face pale as fresh snow. Her eyes met his, and she smiled, her mouth too wide, showing teeth stained with something dark. The climax came when she dropped from the ceiling, landing on the tracks with a wet thud. She began pulling herself toward him with her arms, moving faster than anything should be able to move that way. "You're working late," she said, her voice that same wet gurgle from the radio. I was working late, too, that night, studying for entrance exams. Missed the last train, had to walk home alone. But I never made it home, did I? Tanaka-san ran, but she was faster. He could hear her behind him, that terrible sound getting closer, Teke Teke Teke, mixed with her laughter. He reached a maintenance door, slamming it behind him, but through the reinforced glass window, he saw her stop and stand, on legs that materialized from shadow, making her whole again. She pressed her face against the glass. 3 days. You have 3 days. Then you become like me. He made it to the surface, to the bright lights of Susukino district, but the damage was done. He quit that night, moved back to his parents' house in Kyushu, as far from Sapporo as he could get. But on the third night, he heard it outside his window. Teke, teke, teke. He called a priest, had his house blessed, wore every protection charm he could find. On the fourth morning, Tanaka-san was still alive, but changed. He discovered he could no longer cross train tracks, any train tracks. His body would freeze, his legs would go numb, and he'd hear that sound echoing from nowhere. He lives now in a small island town with no trains, no subways, not even tram lines. But he says on winter nights, when it's cold enough to see his breath indoors, he sometimes wakes to find handprints on his window and scratches on his door that spell out a message: "You ran, others won't." The Sapporo subway still reports mysterious maintenance issues on the Namboku line every December, always between midnight and dawn, always in winter. Workers quit without explanation, and sometimes passengers report hearing strange sounds through the train floors. Tek, tek, tek. But Teke Teke doesn't only haunt train tunnels. Sometimes she comes for those who share her pain, especially students crushed by the same pressure that drove her to those tracks. Our second encounter takes us to Tokyo's Shibuya district, where a prestigious prep school has a rooftop that's been locked since 2019, not for safety reasons as they claim, but because of what students started seeing up there during late-night study sessions. I heard this from a former student who was preparing for her university entrance exams, the same exams that Teke Teke was supposedly studying for on that fatal night decades ago. The legend says Teke Teke specifically targets students who stay late studying, especially those near train stations, because she sees herself in them. The pressure, the exhaustion, the desperation to succeed that makes you stay out past when it's safe. She appears to them first as a fellow student, someone who understands their struggle, before revealing her true, horrible form. The student, let's call her Yuki, was 18, in her final year at one of Shibuya's top prep schools. The building was old but prestigious, 7 floors, with a rooftop study area that was popular with serious students because it stayed open until 2 a.m. The school was only a block from Shibuya Station, the constant sound of trains, a white noise backdrop to their studying. The first oddity started during exam season in November. Yuki was on the rooftop with 5 other students when they heard someone crying in the stairwell. It sounded like a girl, sobbing and repeating, "I failed, I failed, I failed." When one boy went to check, he found the stairwell empty, but there were wet marks on the stairs, like someone had been sitting there. The marks were only on the upper steps, nothing leading up or down. The second sign came a week later. Yuki was alone on the rooftop at 1 a.m., the other students having given up for the night. She heard footsteps on the stairs, but not normal footsteps. It sounded like someone climbing using their hands, a dragging sound between each impact. The door opened and another student entered, a girl in an older version of their school uniform, one Yuki recognized from photos as the style from the 1970s. The girl smiled and sat nearby, opening textbooks that looked water-damaged and old. The escalation happened when the girl spoke. Entrance exams? When Yuki nodded, the girl laughed bitterly. I never got to take mine. Do you know what that feels like? To study so hard your eyes bleed, to sacrifice everything, then have it all taken away in one moment of despair. The temperature dropped, and Yuki noticed the girl's shadow was wrong. It only showed her upper body, even though she appeared whole. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. The girl was no longer sitting, but pulling herself across the rooftop with her arms, her lower body now clearly missing, leaving a trail of something dark and viscous. They found my upper half 50 meters from where I fell, she said, still dragging herself closer. The train dragged me. Tek, tek, tek. That's the sound I made, trying to crawl to my scattered textbooks. The climax was swift and terrible. Teke Teke lunged at Yuki with inhuman speed, her arms stretching impossibly long. Join me, she shrieked. Jump like I did. Let the trains take you too. But Yuki did something unexpected. She threw her textbooks at the spirit and screamed, I'm not you. I'm not going to die for these stupid exams. Teke Teke stopped, inches from Yuki's face. For a moment, she looked human again, sad and young. I wish, she whispered, I had been brave enough to say that. Then she dragged herself to the rooftop's edge and fell backwards, disappearing before hitting the ground. Yuki failed her entrance exams. She failed them on purpose, writing essays about the pressure that drives students to destruction. The school locked the rooftop permanently after her report, though they claimed it was for structural repairs. Yuki became a counselor, specializing in student mental health. But here's the twist. She still sees Teke Teke sometimes, in reflections in train windows, on security cameras at schools, always watching stressed students. But now, instead of attacking, the spirit seems to be warning them, leaving messages scraped into surfaces. It's not worth your life. Some say Yuki's defiance changed something in Teke Teke, gave her a new purpose. Others say Yuki imagined it all, stress-induced hallucinations. But the rooftop remains locked, and late at night, security guards report sounds from up there, not Teke Teke anymore, but crying, and a young voice saying over and over, put the books down, go home, live. Our final encounter with Teke Teke proves that she doesn't always hunt alone. Sometimes she creates more, like herself. For our last story tonight, we're heading to Osaka's Shinsekai district, where a 24-hour arcade had to install some very unusual security measures after a series of incidents in 2020 that the police still can't explain. I got this story from a security guard who worked there during what locals now call the cutting summer. Though you won't find any news reports about it, some things are too strange for official records. In Osaka, they say Teke Teke has evolved with the times. She no longer just haunts train tracks and schools, but appears anywhere young people gather late at night especially places near train lines. The folklore has grown too. They say if she catches you, she doesn't always kill you immediately. Sometimes she cuts you in half and curses you to become like her, spreading her vengeful existence like a disease. The security guard, let's call him Kenji, worked nights at a massive arcade and game center near Shinsekai Station. The place was popular with teenagers and young adults, staying open 24/7. Its neon lights and game sounds a constant presence in the neighborhood. The building was old, built over what used to be a train maintenance yard in the 1960s. The first oddity was the elevator malfunction. The freight elevator that connected the basement storage to the third floor would activate on its own after 3 a.m., but security cameras showed it was always empty. Except once, Kenji noticed, the camera glitched, and for a single frame showed what looked like someone crawling across the elevator ceiling. The second sign was the complaints from late-night gamers. Multiple people reported seeing a girl in a school uniform playing the racing games, but she would disappear when approached. The strange part? The racing game seat would be wet with something that wasn't water, and the screen would display an error message. Track error. Body on track. The escalation began when Kenji found a trail of something dark leading from the basement entrance to the dance game machines on the second floor. Following it, he discovered every screen in that section showing the same thing: security footage from a train station platform, dated 1977, showing a girl falling onto the tracks, but their security system didn't have access to footage that old, and when he blinked, the screens returned to normal. That's when he heard it for the first time. Teke, 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 coming from the basement. He called for backup, but his radio only produced static and what sounded like a train horn. Against every instinct, he went to investigate. The basement door was open, cold air flowing out despite it being summer. Inside, illuminated by the emergency lighting, he saw her. She was playing an old arcade game that hadn't been there before, a train simulator from the 1970s, but she was playing it upside down, crawling on the ceiling, her severed torso hanging down to reach the controls. She turned to look at him, her face young, but her eyes ancient with rage. "Want to play?" she asked. "The goal is to stop the train in time. I never won." The climax came when she dropped from the ceiling and began chasing him through the arcade. But she wasn't alone. From every screen, every speaker, came the sound: Teke, 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 and ghostly figures began emerging from the games. Other victims, Kenji realized. Other people she'd caught over the decades, all missing their lower halves, all dragging themselves with their arms. Kenji ran for the street, but Teke Teke was faster, cutting him off at the entrance. "You've seen us all now," she said. "You know how many there are. Every 3 days, someone else joins us. Unless..." She pointed to a maintenance worker arriving for the early shift. "Bring him to the basement. Feed us someone else, and you go free." Kenji made a choice that haunts him. He quit on the spot, walked past the confused maintenance worker, and never looked back. 3 days later, that maintenance worker was found unconscious at Shinsekai Station, claiming something had pushed him onto the tracks, but the train had mysteriously stopped just in time. The arcade installed blessed mirrors at every entrance and stopped allowing anyone under 20 to enter after midnight. But here's what keeps Kenji awake. He sometimes gets calls from unknown numbers at 3 a.m. When he answers, he hears arcade sounds and that familiar dragging noise. The voice is always different, sometimes young, sometimes old, but the message is the same. You let us starve. We're coming to collect. He's moved 3 times, but the calls follow. He's convinced that one day, Teke Teke will come for him, not alone, but with an army of those she's collected over the decades. The arcade still operates, still profitable, but workers quit regularly, and some nights all the games glitch simultaneously, displaying the same message: game over, continue. These 3 encounters with Teke Teke in Sapporo's tunnels, Tokyo's rooftops, and Osaka's arcades remind us that urban legends evolve with the cities that birth them. Maybe Tanaka-san had a panic attack in those cold tunnels. Maybe Yuki's stress manifested as hallucinations. Maybe Kenji witnessed elaborate pranks by tech-savvy teenagers. But then again, why do Japanese train companies still perform purification rituals? Why do students avoid studying alone after midnight? Why do arcades near train stations close their basements? What do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true ghost stories from across Asia